Welcome back to College Football Addiction. I've got Allie Peak, a peek inside Gators football, and we're going to chat today about something that I found pretty interesting, a tweet thread and maybe some big picture issues at Florida outside of just what kind of went wrong on Saturday. Allie, thank you for joining me. How are you doing outside of the bad start to a football season, which I'm very well familiar with?
Well, listen, the only thing worse than being 0-1 is being 0-2. So, but we can commiserate. This is not my favorite way to start a college football season.
Yeah, it's definitely looking like brunch the last Saturday of November for the tailgate and the
On
kickoff. So
Nickelodeon.
yeah. All right. Thomas Goldcamp of On3 used to work covering the Gators specifically, had a pretty interesting tweet thread, and we'll kind of go through some of it here. And I just want to get your thoughts on different things. I reached out to Thomas and asked him if it was cool if we use this, and he said totally. So, but just what you think, what you've heard, what you may kind of know about some of this, or speculate if you don't know. So, Florida football in a dangerous place for reasons you may not expect on the surface. Going to tweet a little bit here. #Gators. The loss to Miami will put Florida behind the 8 ball in a crucial year 3 of Billy Napier, because no matter what anyone in the administration tells you, you should be fired with 3 straight losing seasons at UF, and now it's a huge uphill climb in 2024 to avoid that. I know you've talked about this, and I actually heard you talk about it on a couple of different shows here this week. Just not only are they about to have their 3rd straight losing season, one of their biggest rivals in the state also hired a coach that very same year. And maybe if they didn't look so good, or if they weren't projected to win their conference or go to the playoff or whatever, and we could talk about Miami's schedule all we want, but maybe if things weren't so good down in South Florida, or seemed to be good, it wouldn't be as bad. But I feel like that just magnifies it.
Oh, it 100% magnifies it because we are in similar positions. We hired coaches within 8 days of each other, and we go after similar recruits. They're, state of Florida kids. We both programs talk about the fact that you've got to lay claim to the top kids in Florida if you're going to be successful. We both pour large amounts of money into, the sport. So it is very disheartening to feel like they are light years ahead when we started from the same place at the same time.
Not to dwell on it, but again, I've had to talk about Boston College for a week now, so whatever. Do you have what's your hope level of maybe Saturday was just really bad and Miami's really good, and it's not as bad as it seems, or does that hope not exist for you? Where do you lie with your thoughts going forward? He mentions the uphill climb to try and get to a bowl or get to a winning season. Does a losing season feel inevitable now?
So, I try really hard to never get too high or too low after one loss. This is one game. You play 12. We expected to win somewhere between 6 and 8 games this year. That is where Florida fans kind of felt like we would potentially fall and Billy would be safe and we would move on to 2025. DJ Lagway would be the guy. I think the issue, and listen, Miami could be a world beater, right? They looked great on Saturday. I have a hard time fully evaluating how good they are because I felt like we were that bad. But Miami could run the table from here on out and head into the playoffs seated, third in out of 12 or something like that. And maybe this looks totally different. I think why Gator fans are kind of in mourning this week is when we look at the schedule, we don't look at Miami as one of the toughest teams we play. So it's more like, well, shoot, if you couldn't get over the hump at Miami, are you going to be able to beat Texas A&M? Are you going to be able to beat Ole Miss? Are you going to be able to beat Tennessee, Kentucky, LSU, Florida State, which that one's looking a little bit more promising. You've got no shot at Texas or Georgia. So it's more about where we kind of gauge Miami versus the rest of the schedule than the fact that we lost one game. We know that there's a lot more tough games, potentially tougher games down the road. And that is kind of a hard pill to swallow. I don't think a losing season is inevitable. I think that there is absolutely time to get the train on the tracks. And listen, you beat Samford, you beat Texas A&M, you go to Mississippi State, you beat them there, you come home and you beat UCF. And this was a blip on the radar at that point. You can go to Knoxville and see what you can get done there and, come home and play Kentucky. The back half of the season is every bit as daunting, if not more daunting than it was right before this game kicked off. But there are winnable games. They just look less winnable now, though.
Um, I mean, we talked about this before the year, but we talked about like, well, if it looks good, if they were to go under 500,
Mhm.
but if it looks good, maybe the situation, maybe he could retain his job. Certainly didn't get off to a look, if they had lost by 3 or something in like a thrilling contest where they played well and Miami was just a
Sure.
little bit better. It certainly didn't get off to that. And I do think that if you were to finish 5-7, which might be a minor, I don't say minor miracle now, but like it seems like finding 5 wins is fairly tough. Um, just it's hard to think that they're going to play that much better against those teams too, right? Like
Yeah.
Georgia's probably going to blow them out. Texas is probably going to blow them out. Ole Miss, I know we haven't seen much out of them, could blow them out. Now, again, they could, Florida State certainly looks like that's a winnable game now, but both teams could certainly, that could be a 3-7 contest.
LSU found a defense, so that looks less winnable than
That
we thought prior to.
that one looks tough. Tennessee
Um,
felt like you maybe had a chance against Tennessee A&M, which I still think they do, but those two seem
Good.
like they're
Yep.
two really good teams. They feel like 2 top 20 teams for sure.
Yeah.
Now it's been 1 week, so who
Yeah.
knows? But
It's absolutely how they lost, not
yeah,
that they lost. You're exactly right when you say if Florida loses by 3, and this was just a back and forth game, but they are in it the entire time. We didn't lose because of stupid coaching mistakes, and we didn't lose because we just are a terrible football team. Then this is a blip on the radar. Miami is a very good team right now, but it just felt like Florida was never in the game, and it felt kind of dead. That is not the juice I expected our team to come out with. We've been waiting 7 months for this, and I couldn't even get any flag waving on the bench. Like, come on.
yeah, it was. As an outsider, I don't know if I've told you this, but I've said this on shows. I've said this like if you would have told me, which for those that don't know, we went to the game together. If you'd have told me it's going to be a 30-point game, well, 28. Well, I guess they scored late, so 24. It's going to be. It's never going to be a game.
Yeah.
And the Swamp's never going to give you anything to get excited about. And it's not going to be that good of an atmosphere. I wouldn't have gone. And you're going to have to sit in the sun and sweat and die in the heat. As an outsider, I would have rather. I went because I thought that I would see a good game one. The Swamp be the Swamp. I was there in 2019 when they beat Auburn top
We were
5
there, Florida State, even that game, which
last year with a couple of backups. Yes.
a great game day atmosphere.
Absolutely.
I honestly was kind of blown away, but that's because Miami was in control from the kickoff, essentially.
start,
And so
yeah.
there was never anything given to fans to get excited about. That stadium is one of the loudest in the country when it's at its peak. And there was never a moment where it felt like it normally does. And that's because there wasn't anything on the field to get excited about. And there was not even anything like I picture Dan Mullen, I want to say it was 2018, maybe it was 2019, when he ran out of the tunnel and he ran all the way down the sidelines, pumping up the stands and stuff before the game kicked off. People were going nuts. Had Napier done that to start the game, there would have been a little bit more juice. And I mean, I know that's not his personality. And listen, that's the last thing I need to complain about, that he didn't run up and down the sidelines. But there just was no energy from anybody. And that is such a weird thing.
So bigger picture here, Thomas goes on. Here's the scarier reality. All the motivation from key decision makers is to keep Billy Napier. Why? He says self-preservation. He said Scott Strickland has had a fairly objectively bad tenure as AD. We could get into that more, but there's a small handful of positives and a whole lot of negatives. In a normal world, he'd be on the chopping block. He may not be, though. For one, the key decision maker above him is in flux with current UF presidential turnover. So Strickland's probably got a touch more cover than he normally would. For him, the only answer is Billy Napier. Can't see him getting a third football hire given his track record. We talked about this a little bit. Like, would it make, because it feels like UF's interim president probably isn't going to replace Strickland. Like, would it make sense for Strickland to, if things continue to trend down, like try and get a massive hire that he could like tie his name to? I know Lane gets rumored quite often, and you don't have to necessarily go into if you think Lane will be the next coach or not. But if you're Strickland, like, is it worth it to try and get Lane hired like late October to try and get like, oh, well, let's see if we can get him for 3 more years? Or would he get fired anyway by the new president, even if Lane was here? Or what are your thoughts there?
Well, Florida is in a really precarious position right now. President Fox has made it very clear to the powers that be, from what I understand, that he is not particularly interested in overseeing a coaching hire, fire, athletic director, hire, fire. He feels like that should be left for the new president. We don't really know what the timeline is for the new president. I know when Sass was hired, everybody was super excited because this was somebody that cared about football, and they knew that that was not President Fox's favorite pastime, right? Or his main driving force, or anything that he was particularly passionate about. But now he's back as our interim president. So that's not great. I do think that Scott Strickland and Billy Napier are tied. This is mutually assured destruction, I think. If Napier doesn't make it, I cannot see how you justify Strickland making it. You shouldn't get to hire 3 football coaches. I don't, this has been a failed tenure. Mullen, although, I think with his ties to the university, and then obviously his ties to Strickland from Mississippi State, I think that hire, maybe you get a little bit more of a pass for. He was a hot name, and he was another coach at an SEC program. But Napier, you kind of plucked from obscurity. And, so you needed to be right. Right? You fired a coach who took you to 3 New Year's Six Bowls in a row the very first season after you didn't. So you better be right with who you go with. I still maintain that punting on 3rd down is the equivalent to that Mullen firing. And he maybe needed to go, but you better be damn sure about who you're hiring to replace him if you're taking out somebody with that kind of record. And that hasn't been Coach Napier. But in terms of hiring Lane Kiffin in October and Strickland seeing if he could save his job, I mean, I find it hard to believe you're going to hire anybody in October, particularly a team that I feel like will be in the playoff hunt. Okay. So even if in October you have some done deal in your drawer, if it's not public knowledge, I don't know that that buys you any credibility with anybody, right? And the way that this is a really interesting
maybe with your boss.
Maybe, yeah. But does he have a boss? I mean, does he have anybody ahead of him who actually cares right now? I'm not confident that he does. But the idea that you have to hire a new head coach the very first year we go to a 12-team playoff is daunting as well, because nobody knows how this is going to work. The championship game is played on January 20th instead of normally a January 8th-ish game. That's another 2 weeks there that is kind of an unknown. And by January 8th, shoot, you still have 8 coaches in it, right? At that point, or, maybe it's down to 4 at that point. I haven't looked at the exact timeline, but it's going to be different than it ever has. And unfortunately, we're in a position where we may end up having to be the guinea pigs for it. But this is not a great position for the University of Florida because of all of the extra stuff going on right now.
So he goes on to say that you've seen posturing on turning down the heat on Napier heading into the season. I don't know if that's, again, I think it like you said, it's kind of like tied to Strickland, like Strickland.
Yeah, it benefits him for there to be no heat on Napier because the heat on Napier is on him.
Not one to predict how the season unfolds, but I've seen this movie before. The snowball seems to be rolling downhill with a lot of speed. Good luck trying to corral it. I do know that pressure can make a difference, and there will be pressure, so we'll see what happens. The overall backdrop is pretty bleak beyond just the on-field results. You've got an admin trying to actively lower the program standard. That shouldn't happen. At a place like Florida, the whole thing is so very frustrating. People complain about Florida's UAA and just the decision makers there. What is the big complaint, or and you don't have to go super deep here, get yourself in trouble. I don't know if you care or not, but what's the big complaint on just like the overall mood towards football at Florida?
So I think, well, as the UAA ties in here with football, a lot of it is speculation and innuendo. But I know that there are a lot of people that feel very strongly that the UAA is not as 100% on board with NIL as they should be. I know that some people don't like NIL. They don't love that you're paying your offensive lineman $30,000 a year to play for them, or, whatever. And I get that. But this is the era we're in college football, and the programs that are winning are the programs that are putting money towards the individual players. And I know you have to do it through a collective, but I'll give you an example. If an alumni comes to you, a donor comes to you and says, hey, I have $1 million, where would the best place be for me to invest it? I think there are a lot of people that feel that the UAA says, come and give it to us for our building fund instead of what the correct answer should be, which is you should go ahead and call up Florida Victorious and make that donation there to them so that we can win on the field as quickly as possible. Now, I don't have $1 million to donate, so I have never called the UAA with this proposition, right? But I can tell you from the people that I talk to, the growing suspicion is that that doesn't happen when large donations are coming in. And so, you know, the building projects are important. You want your, Florida's stadium is going to need some renovations very quickly. There's some issues going on with the foundation that no matter what they do elsewhere need to be fixed. They need to be ADA compliant in, some places that there aren't. And those things do need to happen. But we're also sending out surveys asking about party decks and being able to watch from the field level in a suite they build down there and things that are not something that needs to be a priority, nor do I think people are really interested in. And so I think that that's part of it. I also think Florida's UAA has always been incredibly careful. And I want to be careful about how I say this because I don't think that's a bad thing. But there's a lot of tape. There's always been a lot of tape, even far before Florida got to this NIL moment, that we're all in right now. And I think that can be frustrating to coaches. I've talked to former head coaches who feel that that was a hindrance to them. And so it wouldn't surprise me if that continues to be a hindrance until there's an overall attitude shift inside that building.
And it is tough. And I'll say this, that doesn't just happen at Florida. It might be tougher at Florida, might be, worse at Florida or whatever. But I do think that's pretty common. Like the reason we even have NIL is because the people making all of the money in college football didn't want to share it with the players, right? Whether that's school presidents or athletic directors or administrations like the UAA or booster organizations or whatever, or TV producer, TV network executives, whatever. The reason we have to do NIL, the reason where you and I have to try and contribute or raise funds is because people didn't want to share with the players. And so they said, oh, well, give them NIL and that'll shut them up, right? Well, it didn't, right? Like the House is going to rule that they do have to end up sharing. Yeah. But, and so it's not really a surprise to me that these organizations that have been making millions and millions and millions of dollars every year don't want to stop making those same millions and millions. And it is competition. Like the athletic administration and the AD, like their job is to hire coaches, to build buildings, to bring up all, the athletic department. But they don't winning. And it's going to cost. And I think it's going to cost some of them. Like it's, like they're going to start losing games because they didn't have that mindset change. But it makes sense to me that they don't.
You change or die, right? You have got to adapt. And I don't even picture it as like the UAA being greedy per se. I picture it like we still have the attitude from the 90s and the early 2000s where we say, we are Florida. We shouldn't have to overpay. We have the best facilities in the country. You're getting a top 3 public education. You are this and this and this and things that used to move the needle for kids. But the only thing that moves the needle for kids right now is money and winning. And currently, Florida's not doing a great job at either. I think Florida Victorious has really stepped it up in the last 12 months. I think Freddie Wiebe did an incredible job for them, just kind of rebranding and getting this off the ground. But you can't sustain with the $20 a month donations from fans. You are going to need some of those high dollar donors to continually put their money there as opposed to, a tower that's named after them on campus. But that requires an attitude shift from the people telling them where they should best put their money.
Yeah, it is. It's, that mindset works at a few places, Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, maybe right now.
It used to work in Florida. It's just not the moment we're in.
They just, people don't care. And, Miami went through the same thing. For 20 years, they thought, oh, private university, you're living in South Florida. We've got the best weather. It's Miami. Who wouldn't want to do this? And then they got, it seems like they've gotten serious about embracing NIL, investing in their staff. And it looks like, it's one game.
I mean, they used to pay players all the time. They knew the deal and then they got in trouble for the deal.
And then, and I think their president for a long time, Donna Shalala, didn't want to be part of that anymore. They've got new leadership. They've got a different buy-in investment. I mean,
Yeah.
personally, I think Mario said, I ain't coming there unless you do this, because
Right.
Phil Knight's got the check up here that'll give me anything I want. And
100%.
so if I was Mario, I wouldn't have gone down there either unless they were going to promise me the world. So anyway, Allie, where can people follow you? Where can they find more of your work?
You can find me on YouTube at A Peek Inside Florida Gator Football, or on Twitter at Allie, ALI_peek, PEEK. And, I love interacting with fans. This is the best time of year, even when your team is 0-1.
Yeah, combined 3 losses for us through 1 week is pretty incredible.
Yeah,
So
that's pretty
not the way I saw it going.
by the end of week 1.
Yeah. So fortunately, we've got a bye week, so we can't screw it up this week. So
There you go.
thanks for hanging out and hopping on today, Allie.
No problem.